Welcome everyone to this conversation. Thanks again for joining us here in the Disruption Lounge. My name is Ben Baer. I'm the executive editor for Fast Company and our content studio. And I'm excited to have this conversation today because it's on a topic that is clearly top of mind of everybody in the business community right now, which is artificial intelligence and AI. AI is not a new thing. It's been around for a while, but the applications and generative AI are starting to become a conversation that every business is having about what should I be doing with it? What do I need to think about it? And how should I apply it to my business if I should? So I'd like each of you to share a little bit about sort of like what your company's role is in the AI ecosystem overall. VJ, if you want to start, just tell us a little bit about sort of what Scale does and what your role is there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that you pointed out AI has been around for a while, and this is just the latest phase of what is a really exciting field. Scale AI has been around since 2016. We started off tackling really the core problems for self-driving cars. So when you think about autonomy and you think about level 4 or level 5 self-driving, it's really a data problem of understanding what's coming off cameras, what's coming off LiDAR systems, and how machine learning models can understand the world around the car so that you can navigate through obstacles. And we really, in the early days, we tackled that data problem with a perspective that no one else had, that you needed a quality view of that data so that the models could understand a given city or a given city street at a level of fidelity that you would trust getting into that car, and you trust the car being able to navigate without you having your hands on the wheel. From there, we've launched into all other sorts of problems around AI. And definitely over the last few years, we've just had our entire business transformed by generative AI. We were fortunate to partner with OpenAI on the paper that led to ChatGPT. Really the ability to align large language models with what human beings expect when you have a conversation with that model. Something that no one thought was possible before. And really 6 months ago, we kind of saw the launch of ChatGPT, and now we're really all through the looking glass together. We know the capabilities these models really have. So really we're powering that revolution. We partner across the board with AI research organizations, with large enterprises, industry-specific problems, and we're bringing the power of generative AI and large language models to all of these diverse use cases for humanity.
We'll talk a little bit about those use cases and some of the different executions and what that means for a company strategy a little bit. Explain a little bit. NVIDIA is known long-term about its technology company, a graphics company, but obviously is becoming more and more known for other lines of business, which include AI.
Yes, NVIDIA has been known for gaming, and everybody knows it for its GPUs, right? But I think that gaming is the killer use case. However, it's the compute engine for all of model training and everything. And so the areas that we have put a lot of investment into is robotics, automotive, genomics, and we provide toolkits around this. I think one of the early principles of CUDA was to be an open system, and so researchers have really built upon all of that, and now we're really seeing the fruits of that labor. But it was a really long time coming, right? I think CUDA was open in 2006, right? And so I think all of the compounded development is really what we're seeing now.
And AI has now kind of moved out of the CTO and the CIO sort of area, and now it's become the CEO asking questions. I got to understand what's going on with AI for my business. And so I'm interested to hear from each of you kind of like, what are the questions you're getting right now, and what advice do you have to the companies out there that are thinking like, all right, I ought to have an AI strategy? VJ, why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about sort of what you're hearing from the companies that you work with.
Yeah, that's exactly right. At the CEO level, there are too many companies right now that have seen their stock price drop by more than 10% in a single day if you don't get your AI strategy down right. So pretty much across the board, we're talking to every large company, every industry vertical, and really trying to figure out ways where we can empower that CEO to have the right strategy that's capable of being delivered and executed on this quarter and not having to wait 2 or 3 quarters out. Across the board, everyone knows that there are transformative experiences that could power consumer-facing products. There are experiences that could power internal workflows. You could rethink how you do claims adjusting if you're an insurance company and really think about property and casualty insurance in a brand new way. We are working on products, for example, where you can look at text data that's written in a property claim related to vehicle damage. But you can also look at an image of that car and see what sort of damage was done there. You can look at geographic data and state, well, there's flooding that happened in South Florida where this car was located in the past. And really just have a model explain to a claims adjuster, these are all the things you need to consider. This is why you might need to kick this up to an extra level of review. For really helping empower human beings who understand these domains really well So really leverage the model in order to do their work better. So across the board, we're talking to executives that are both thinking through external consumer-facing products, similar to ChatGPT, and then internal-facing products that change how knowledge work is done for all of us.
Yeah. Chow, what about you? And I mean, you were hearing it, I think, earlier today. People want to know, the executives want to know, what should I be doing? So what is the advice that you give to the companies that are thinking about this, that maybe are feeling a little bit more pressure to have a strategy, but also the ones that have come to you in the past to say, all right, I need to start applying this. How should I think about it?
Right. And I think that there's the power of the foundational model. And I think that's what people are experiencing when they download ChatGPT. But then there's also some that are specific. And I think some of those are the use cases that you're talking about, right? Enterprises are going to have to develop models internally for their own company, right? And I think a great example of that is search. I think we all have see really powerful search engines, right? And so training, these smaller models, and NVIDIA, we provide that type of tooling for you to do we call it NEMO LLM, right? But then to provide that internally for each enterprise.
I mean, I think a lot of companies start to think, okay, how can I save money by using AI, right? But it's a lot of ways about how can I be more productive? How can my workforce be more productive with AI? Based on a lot of the conversations that we're hearing at Fast Company, what we've learned in sort of our reporting is that there's this idea of it being a co-pilot, an assisted technology. So BJ, I mean, your thoughts on this, because obviously a lot of what you and the company like Scale does is apply human training to the AI technology.
Yeah, no, it's a great example. And a lot of people, when they hear Copilot, they think of the most famous cases, GitHub Copilot, which is really empowering developers to do something at a level of productivity that they didn't have in the past. But that Copilot concept can be applied towards all sorts of knowledge work. We brought up the claims adjuster pattern, but we also work with the national government. We work to make sure analysts can look at data on the ground in real time and use the power of these models to understand opportunities to better leverage repair resources or other things. One of the reasons we won Time's Best New Inventions of 2022 was for our work in Mariupol in Ukraine, where we're able to apply the power of large language models plus object detection models to look at rooftop damage that's recovered overnight and be able to see whether infrastructure was damaged in that city so that repair crews, rescue workers can move and navigate on the ground in real time with that analyst support. So that's the sort of work that really just takes the Copilot model and applies it to all sorts of mission critical, and honestly, where time is of the essence is where the Copilot functionality becomes super important, because these models can attend to a large volume of data much faster than any human being would be able to review through. So I think it's going to be, kind of how we live all our lives in the future if you look 5 to 10 years out. And really coding is just the place where we're getting started.
Yeah. Chow, what about at NVIDIA? Like, how do you view AI as terms of its application for people to be more productive, more efficient?
Programming has always kind of been only accessible to those that are able to code, right? And it's another language. And I think that's where this power is really kind of interesting. I have kids, and so I want them to know multiple languages, and it really expands the power and their reach of what they're able to do. I think large language models have that same ability, right? And so people that were never able to code before can now actually produce applications and have this output. And we're only going to, and I think it's really, limitless in terms of the application that we're going to see out of this, but it's really just the beginning. And so it's really hard to say where this will really go.
How do we need to balance the role of regulation versus innovation, right? Because it's exciting when it's innovation, but you also got to make sure that it's being applied in the appropriate way and it's used in the right way, and that everyone's using it for the right reasons. So I've been interested to see both of your perspectives, because it's still an ongoing discussion about balance of not putting too much regulation so it's hamstrings innovation, but having enough regulation to make sure that the proper innovation happens the right way.
Yeah, especially when you think about industry-specific use cases, regulation really needs to make sure that AI can empower these companies, these consumers, to do the right decision-making in the right moment. But it also plays a really key role in avoiding bias and other really difficult problems that creep up. These models, large language models, are trained on all the text that's been written by human beings on the internet. Pretty much anything that's ever been written, these models have been trained on. And so there's a huge opportunity to both leverage that and be able to do a lot of complicated reasoning, but also a huge risk that misinformation can be introduced. If you ask a question about COVID vaccines, it's both read really important scientific research, but the model's also read, misinformation that's been published there. So we really think there's an important step, which is alignment of the models and helping the models understand what a reasonable human being would expect to see out of a response or a dialogue with that model. And that's really the last 0.1% sometimes of the computational resources you use, but ends up being really critical to making sure the model is useful to human beings and avoids a lot of the problems that the regulators need to consider.
I think regulation and policy is going to really have to catch up. And I like to frame this technology in terms of it's a probabilistic and not a deterministic engine, right? And so understanding that this is a reasoning engine or something like that, right? Policymakers, there's no really rigid, rules that you can set around it. And who's going to be defining those rules, right? I think we're going to start to formulate all these committees, or I don't know what it's going to look like, right? UN or G8 or all of these committees that we had to do in response to disruptions in the past. And so it's going to be a similar effort going forward now.
Yeah, and I think the lessons have been learned a little bit in the past of waiting too long to sort of set up the discussions about these things and just say, let's see how it plays out. Yeah. And then unfortunately things do end up sometimes in some messy areas. In terms of the next level of innovation with AI, generative is getting a lot of attention, but that's not the only part of AI that exists out there. I'd be interested to hear from both of your perspectives of what other areas of AI that people should be paying attention to for their business and for their organizations beyond just generative. Chao, why don't you start?
You have one?
Yeah, well, NVIDIA is definitely powering a lot of those. So, self-driving, I think, is definitely just still in the early days of figuring out some of these cases. But we do see a lot of value in, for example, construction sites, being able to use vehicles that can navigate a construction site more safely than human beings can, and be able to move materials and resources from one end to another, navigating really tricky environments. That's it. That's not the traditional thing you think about. You think about self-driving, but it's an adaptation of these algorithms and these techniques that we developed to situations to just make life safer for construction workers and people on the ground. I imagine that being true in mining, all sorts of other industries in the future. I think you're really just going to see wherever human beings are threatened by really tricky environments or fast-changing conditions, you'll just see the adaptation of these self-driving techniques to making robots and other vehicles safer and better able to handle this.
Yeah, I think two areas that are interesting is simulation. So if just for even climate change research or anything like that, and then also genomics. I think just for us, I think we often think about the power of AI for a lot of chat bots and things like that, but there's a lot of real human problems that we need to be solving for. And so I think the potential there is quite great.
This comes up a lot with big data because oftentimes people say, oh, it's great. We've never had more data than we ever had in the world. But the problem is that there's not necessarily a lot of data analysis out there that because of the vast scope and scale of it. Do you guys see that AI might be, again, this ability to sort of, again, present options for people to then make the determination themselves with the data? And again, the co-pilot idea, but the advisor, again, raising things up for people to take a look at based on large data sets where it's all right, a human would take probably 10 times, 100 times longer to actually analyze it and potentially present a result.
Definitely, even just how we shop for clothes or how we dress ourselves. AI now is able to understand your behavioral data and patterns of how you visit an e-commerce retailer and connect maybe offline and online behavior together, and then present to you entirely personalized campaigns or perspectives on what you might want to wear. A great example, we partner with a lot of these big e-commerce platforms, and where a platform might know that you're traveling to Vancouver this summer and you're going on a hike and you're buying hiking boots, it's an amazing opportunity to suggest, the right sort of pants, the right sort of jacket that you should wear for Vancouver Island in September. That was not something that we had before, and now these models can actually generate imagery that puts you in that situation or puts your avatar in that situation. It's just kind of game-changing for how you think about how people purchase products and think about the world around them and how they want to represent themselves in that world. So I think it's kind of the future of personalization and the sort of techniques that we'd always dreamed about that are now possible. It'll be interesting how humanity navigates that, working with AI and trying to figure out your own self-identity in the middle of that.
Yeah, as you were saying that, it's kind of interesting to think about how we have used past data to inform a lot of our recommendations currently, right? That's the current model. However, a lot of times actually our context is actually more valuable in terms of determining what we want rather than the past data. And so, we had the big data wave where, data was gold, and that was really the slogan. But maybe we don't need our historical data and that privacy isn't necessary anymore, but it's really the context around you that really influences your buying behaviors, right? And so maybe the ad industry may see a different change here.
Well, so you brought up the issue of privacy and trust, right? So then that kind of has to go in hand because there's always the positive impacts of it, but then there's the, all right, potential negative impacts of like, okay, now you're starting to assess things about me based on my usage, which has been an issue in the advertising industry. Sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. So I mean, this is like, how do we make sure that the environments and the recommendations we still have that control over it as a personal individual of like, what do I want AI looking at versus what I don't want them looking at?
Yeah, this is really an emerging field, and there's lots of interesting areas of research here. Before Scale, I was at Apple for many years, and I remember the day Tim Cook came into an interview and stated, privacy is a human right, and we really need to consider this in everything that we do. And that really put a stake in the ground that led the next couple of years of how we think about this field. And now with these large language models, it's really kind of a difficult challenge in that the models can make a lot of decisions based upon data that it has about you. It could be behavioral data that you shared with a platform. It could be data that's on the public internet if you're a public figure that's been written about you. Helping the model explain to you the reasoning behind why it wrote what it did about you, made a recommendation to you, generated an image that was personalized for you. It's going to be incredibly important to let us all have control over how these models think about people and the world around them. Because by default, they've all made assumptions about us based upon what we've shared on the internet, what our names reveal about us, what our backgrounds reveal about us. And we should be in control of that decision-making rather than this private data that was shared publicly.
Yeah. I think that feedback loop is going to be really important, right? Because I think that's kind of the difference between each generation of ChatGPT, right? Is that how well they've made that feedback loop and so, and how clean the data is and all of that too. So, I mean,
yeah. Is there a future where like the AI truly is personal, where it's like, okay, Siri on my phone or virtual assistant of your choice is really there to help you and you're training it yourself for, what you need from it versus necessarily maybe what somebody else needs? I mean, what is that? Is that a potential future that we could look at? Is that someone to be thinking about?
Well, I think that skill set is being developed, right? I feel like I only recently understood like prompt engineering, right? And those kind of things, the skill sets that people are now understanding how to really work with AI, right? In order to personalize it for yourself or whatever you want to do. So I think that those skill sets are coming up, but it's very a new field.
We at Scale AI 6 months ago, we hired the world's first staff prompt engineer as our job title. And it's a brand new job title. We figure out how much do we pay, how much do we, because it didn't exist before. But I do think that is the job category of the future. It's this incredibly powerful technique to get the models to react in a new way or in a way that's aligned with what human beings expect out of it. And the people that do it really well, they understand the nuances of how these models think, like techniques like chain of thought, helping the model walk through a possible answer in a structured way. All of that makes the model much more powerful. One of the funniest things this prompt engineer showed us is if you ask a question where accuracy is really important and the model gets it maybe 50% right when you start off, all you have to do is tell the model, I am a very smart computer at the beginning of this prompt you sent to the model. And the model interprets that. It's like, I'm a smart computer, and it'll give a 60% accurate result instead of a 50% accurate. It's just this incredible result of how you train the models to think in a certain way, think about themselves in a certain way. You get a dramatically different answer.
I hadn't heard that before. That's really interesting.
AI needs a self-confidence boost before you answer? Okay, real sense. All right, that's interesting, and yes, maybe a little scary too. Like, all right, if my AI is feeling sad one day, I'm gonna get worse answers. You brought up talent, and that's a good segue into talking a little bit about sort of like, all right, this field is emerging, it's evolving. What are some of the skill sets that are needed in this new role? And John, I want you to start with you just to hear a little bit about, so, all right, as you're hiring and also training, but also maybe upskilling your existing employees, what are the skill sets that you're looking for, within your team, but within the larger group?
Because I feel like it's a very new area right now. I think thoughtfulness is really important, and I feel like that sounds like a soft skill, but it's just right now, as we are developing, we're putting into all of our products the requirements and everything to really go back to have a committee around how are we doing the data, all of that kind of stuff. And I think just because it is a new territory, and so we're really trying to make sure that we have the product security people involved, we have data cleaning involved, and all of that kind of stuff. So I think those kind of skill sets are going to be important. One thing about skill set that you mentioned is that this is going to affect more white collar jobs than blue collar jobs. And I think that that's why maybe all of our enterprises we're getting a lot more attention around it, right? Because all of these enterprises, they realize that, for example, I'm a product manager, and one of the things that we do is do a PRD, right? AI is actually very good at putting together a PRD, right? Because a lot of our data is already out there, and so they actually put this together. So I really challenge a lot of people, especially here, right, to look at what you do on a day-to-day basis and put it into ChatGPT and see what it gives you. Oftentimes, they'll probably give you something very, very accurate. And it's your 3-hour job becomes like a 1-hour job, right? And that really changes things. That also means from an enterprise perspective, how much less do you need? But at the same time, it comes at a cost, right? So that's all this computing power, right? I think I saw some numbers around each query is about a couple pennies. That's not a small amount of money when added all together, right? And so I think everyone's going to kind of look at how this affects their own job and what is the ROI on that.
Sure. What about the hiring piece? And you talked about new jobs that are coming creating. Like, what's that look like at scale, and how are you thinking about it for the future too?
Definitely, yeah. And it was interesting you brought up education and how our kids use these models and how it's going to influence them. My daughter's 5, so she has a ways to go. But, compared to me, I did computer science as undergrad. I'm hopeful when she goes to college, she also does computer science or something like that. But maybe also add like studio art or philosophy or English at the end of it. Because we are now really struggling to find people that both understand the models and understand, the computer science and theory behind it, but really then can think about policy and regulatory issues and bias and how they can creep in, get the model to talk about really complicated legal issues and really give a perspective back to the model on ways you could train that. And then think about what was in the training data that led the model to think that way, for ways where, you can have the model think more academically about some topics and think more from a human perspective on other topics. And I think unless you have that like kind of well-rounded background to both have the computer science background and have that like understanding of the law or humanities or philosophy, it's really hard to have that full well-rounded perspective. So I think that's the way of the future and the sort of jobs are going to come.
I think one thing I want to add about that is I think I like the term nuance recently, right? A lot of the output is nuanced, and I think we're going to kind of bring that back into the world again, because I think oftentimes we look for these definitive answers, and the world is more gray than black and white, right?
Yes, I mean, certain things are like, yes, math problems, yes, easy, but when there's qualitative things, that becomes gray area, right? But I'm also interested to hear, like, all right, there's probably English majors out there going, what do I need to do for my job? Is there jobs for AI in them for you talking about smoking prompts and things that need, like, the AI needs to respond in a way that is human, right? So who is going to do that? It's not necessarily typically a technology person that's thinking about that. So is there a role for that type of, like, job out there for, like, the English majors, the philosophy majors that are maybe in the humanities?
Yeah, there are people out there right now. There are at least thousands of people that are asking a model to generate a poem for them. And how many people understand the difference between, the Shakespearean, way of writing that stanza versus like, a romantic era way of doing it. Like all those nuances about what makes a good poem, what defines style and aesthetics. That's something that comes from a really well-rounded background. So you've seen just a surge in interest in work of that. We work with lots of people with those backgrounds to help these models get better. And it's the combination of understanding what these models are capable of with what human beings have always done with the humanities and the ways in which we've talked about the world around us that really helps the models get better at working with humans and being of assistance to humans.
I want to wrap up by talking a little bit about risk-taking within innovation. So, again, risk-taking is part of a mindset of like, okay, let's take some risks to develop the next big thing. But you also have to be thoughtful about, all right, what do those risks mean when it comes to something like AI? So I'm interested to hear kind of like what each of your company's approaches are to sort of risk-taking within innovation or the operations of what you do, making sure that it balances both of those priorities. Chow, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think NVIDIA's risk-taking is very similar to actually OpenAI's in terms of like just being really transparent and open and failing, right? And I think that that in the space like this, it's really important that and you're going to get compounded return with that, right? And so I think that being transparent was probably the best way to take a risk. And those new areas are not something that we really know how it's going to go. And so I think that's kind of how we've been approaching it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think no one quite knows exactly where the next 6 months are going to lead with just the pace of these models developing. And so everyone has to take risks. Like the pace of innovation is just too fast and you can't just not leap in full forwarded and see where it's going to go. But it's risk within bounds. It's understanding, well, if I have a model that's going to spew out hate speech and I'm asking teenagers to use this model in my app, that might not actually be the right call. It might actually be much more damaging to my users than the alternative. And then finding ways to make that model aligned with what human beings expect. That, hey, if I have a 13-year-old asking a question about, alcohol, probably that's not appropriate in the U.S. for the model to give an answer. And so making the model get better to understand the bounds that it operates in, the ways human beings think about ourselves, the ways in which we structure our responses. It's important to think about that realistically before you start deploying these applications.
Yeah. Good point. So optimism about the future. I would like to hear from each of you to share a little bit about, your perspective on, in 3 years, where do you sort of see AI going? I mean, I know that's a long way away, it feels like, with it, but what are your hopes in terms of both of you having worked in this field now for multiple years? Where do you hope to see in 3 years we are with AI? Shep?
What's funny is we said 3 years, and I think I heard that OpenAI had the recent ChatGPT for 7 months before they released it, right? And for them, I feel like that was a lifetime for them to really hold back that technology. So 3 years, I think a lot can really change in 3 years, right? I think simulation I thought was really interesting, and I think simulation is one of those areas where maybe we can hope for like a better world, a better future by simulating it and playing out different scenarios. I think one of the biggest risks is in cybersecurity. I think a lot of people have said that. But one of the advantages in cybersecurity is that we're kind of used to this cat and mouse game. And so we might be more prepared in terms of like a culture to react to it. There's probably going to be other areas that this will hit a lot harder, and they'll need to really adapt. So, and those are two areas where I think might be interesting.
Yeah, it's great that you bring up insider risk and security issues there. I think within 3 years, every company is going to have their own AI. It doesn't matter if you are selling home goods or you're selling sneakers or you're doing insurance. Every company is going to have their own AI, and it's going to be within their perimeter, their circle of trust, a model that they know can go and search for information, understand the roles and permissions behind that information, will not reveal too much to the wrong user about what's happening behind the scenes. And with that level of trust, that model is going to be incredibly empowered to help operate the company and really come up with decision-making that empowers executives to make the right decisions. So I think every company is going to have that. It'll have to live within your data center or your cloud, and it won't be able to leave that boundary of trust. They'll have to have really strong guardrails on it. But once you have that, it's just transformative for a company. I don't see any company living without that.
Yeah, and figuring out what works for your organization and how important it is. Good final thoughts. Ciao, Vijay. Thanks again for sharing your perspectives with us on AI, and we'll hopefully be back again next year to see where we are. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today for this conversation, and we look forward to having future conversations about disruption in AI coming soon. Thank you.
Thank you.